Having argued that religion in general and Christianity in particular are direct outcomes of unjust social conditions, Marx declares that religion is so thoroughly determined by economic factors that it's pointless to consider any of its doctrines or beliefs on their own terms. So he wouldn't have been interested in apologetics. It's just a product of economic and material deprivation. Their origins are socio-economic, not intellectual. Whereas earlier generations of atheist writers had attempted to demonstrate the incoherence of, say, the Trinity or the existence of God, Marx undermines them by totally insisting that they are nothing more than the creation of purely social forces. Marx's explanation of the origins of religion makes a detailed engagement with specific ideas of theology or Christianity or whatever unnecessary. Religion is a human creation in response to the alienation, key point, alienation, experienced through the process of production. Its specific teachings are not relevant, and we need not be troubled by them, he says. Materialism affirms that the events in the material world bring about corresponding changes in the intellectual world. Thus, religion is thus the result of a certain set of social and economic conditions. Change these conditions, and religion will cease to exist. It will no longer serve any useful function, he thought. Unjust social conditions produce religion and are in turn supported by religion. Quote Marx here. He said, the struggle against religion is therefore indirectly a struggle against the world of which religion is the spiritual fragrance, unquote. Marx thus argues that religion will continue to exist as long as it meets a need in the life of alienated people. He wrote, the religious reflex of the real world can only then vanish when the practical relations of everyday life offer to man none but perfectly intelligible and reasonable relations with regard to his fellow men and women. Of course, he's talking about socialism here, the world of socialism. In other words, a shake-up in the real world is needed to get rid of religion. Marx argues that when a non-alienating economic and social environment is brought about through communism, the needs that gave rise to religion will simply vanish. And with the elimination of those material needs, spiritual hunger, he thinks, will also vanish. And at this point, to conclude, Marx, we can focus perhaps on one of his most famous and most quoted phrases, and it's in his contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of law, not the most concise title, 1844 he wrote this. He drew the following conclusion, and this is probably one of his most famous statements ever made. Religious distress is at the same time an expression of real distress and a protest against real distress. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, just as it is the spirit of a spiritless situation. It is the opium of the people. It is the opium of the people. In other words, it's a drug. And we shouldn't be on drugs. We should be able to think clearly and change our material conditions. And we won't need drugs anymore. We won't need this high that keeps us intoxicated from the real world, to paraphrase him. So we can conclude that atheism, for Marx, is the natural ideology of a communist society. And what I find interesting, in parentheses almost, is the so-called new Soviet man, as it was called in the 20th century. And this was like an archetypal person who was supposed to be thoroughly godless and atheist. But when the Soviet Union, which was communist, obviously, and tried to create this new Soviet man, collapsed in 1991, people flocked back to the church. Religion had survived the imposition of communist and atheist ideology. So actually, this theory hadn't worked. When you ban the churches, when you persecute Christians and Muslims too, of course, in the Soviet Union, you create this new Soviet man based on atheist principles. It didn't work, of course. Our fitra rebelled, and the inner nature rebelled, and the people. And this is why church attendance in Russia today is a very, very high level, even still, a reaction against atheist communism, which so persecuted people.